Hello, everyone, and welcome to the IR Global podcast. IR Global is the largest community of international professional services. It's a network to help you enhance your offering to your clients and to network with other people in the professional services industry. I'm your host of the IR Digital Global podcast, Jennifer Riggins. Our podcast has a strong emphasis, like the organization, on international view, which is why today we're going to talk with Adrienne Braumiller, who is widely recognized as the leading authority in customs, import, export, and ITAR, if I'm pronouncing that right, the international traffic and arms regulation compliance. She is a partner at Braumiller Law Firm, a full-service customs international trade law firm with offices in LA, Houston, Toledo, and Mexico. So today we're going to pick Adrienne's brain all about what's going on with the seemingly endless U.S. trade wars with China, what that means for international business, and really how your business can best navigate the customs tariffs and fees. So Adrienne, why don't you start by telling us a bit about yourself and your background in the area?
Oh, sure. Thank you so much, Jennifer. Yes. Well, my background dates back a little bit. I started in customs and international trade back in 1989 with a customs boutique law firm out of San Francisco. I think I was 5 at the time, so that makes me what? Not very old right now. But anyway, so I've been doing this for So I've been doing this for quite some time. Customs and international trade focus. Started my law firm in 1992 to focus 100% on international trade and customs. So a very long history on all things related to global trade.
What made you go that route? What made you want that area?
When I was 16, my parents sent me on a trip to Greece and Holland, and I had already planned on going into law, and I thought, international law seems like something that would be very interesting to me, but I didn't really know what that meant. And it wasn't until I went to college that my advisor was an attorney from the Netherlands, and she was the one back in 1980 who encouraged me to think about international trade as really the future as globalization was kind of taking off.
Oh, that's
really in its infancy. She was pretty much a visionary, but it was in its infancy in 1980. This is pre-internet, but that was very wise advice on her part, and so that's how I ended up here.
So certainly globalization touches all of us pretty much every day. But this particular conversation is going to focus a lot on sections 301 and 232 of the U.S. trade regulations. So for people listening in, who would most benefit from listening to this podcast and who maybe could give it a pass?
I think anyone who is involved in any kind of imports or exports in or out of the U.S. would be interested in this podcast.
And does that just mean physical or also importing software or something on the internet?
It's really tangible. It would really be tangible exports, and there is no such thing as intangible imports. So it's tangible imports and exports.
Very cool. Mm-hmm. And so we keep hearing this word trade war. It sounds very intense. Are we at war is the U.S. at war with China? What is a trade war? Is that even the accurate way to call it?
Yes, absolutely. Yes, we have been in a trade war with China. When we first initiated additional duties on China, that was after a study by the U.S. Trade Representative, a very in-depth study. But when we placed those duties on the first tranche of items that were subject to these duties, China within 24 hours mirrored the exact amount of duties that we placed on them. So it's really been a tit for tat throughout this the last several months Anytime we imposed duties, they retaliated. So yes, it's definitely a trade war.
But a very organized one, like a game of Battleship. Your turn, now my turn.
Yes, exactly. But I think the good thing is that there is a light at the end of the tunnel. I'm an optimist, but the talks with China have been going fairly well. So I think that hopefully we will see some positive circumstances or changes occur, I wouldn't say by the end of March, because I don't think we're going to have a deal with China by the end of March. I mean, that was the ultimate goal, but I don't think that's going to happen. I think it could be several more months as we work through the various key points that we're concerned about. But I think by the end of this year, hopefully things will have shaken out and we'll see kind of a return to some normalcy in the relationship with China.
Because I assume it's U.S.'s biggest trading partner, typically, right?
Yes, it has. And what's really crazy, what's really surprising, it amazed me, is that even though we put these additional duties on China, the trade deficit with China has increased.
Oh, really? Oh, that's interesting.
Yes,
has it pivoted
so
to different
strange.
items?
I think honestly it could be a number of reasons. I don't know for a fact that this is the case, but I would think that there may have been instances where companies rushed to import things prior to the effective date of the duties, or they stocked up. A lot of people were trying to stock up prior to these duties, so that could have something to do with it. And then there's some importers into the U.S. simply say, look, even with these additional duties, we don't have a choice. There's no other source available for us, and some companies have said there's no cheaper source available. So they continue, even with the duties, to bring these items in regardless of these additional duties.
So is it making that big of a difference? Is it changing the way Americans do business at all, this trade war?
I actually think it is. What's really interesting is there are companies that simply say, it is what it is. We'll just try to hang on until this trade war subsides, right? So I think that's part of it. But then most of the clients that I deal with are clients that want to be proactive. And
what kind of clients are they? Like, what kind of jobs do they do, or roles?
A lot of them are anything from consumer goods to industrial equipment. Mm-hmm. So I think you'll see in scientific instrumentation. So I've had several clients come to me and say, we want to think about how we can mitigate these increased duties on our products. And so I think I should probably say here, the purpose of Section 301, it came out of the Trade Act of 1974. And so the purpose of that section is to allow the president to retaliate, to obtain the removal of any kind of policy or practice of a foreign government that he thinks is discriminatory or unreasonable and that burdens or restricts U.S. commerce. And so that is essentially what happened here because of China's wholesale technology transfer requirements. They would often force U.S. companies who had joint ventures with Chinese companies to transfer their intellectual property. And so this really is focused on the intellectual property being usurped by the Chinese government. So that's the concern. Is like, how do we prevent them from doing this further in the future?
Well, that's interesting because intellectual property is in the basis of the Constitution. It's something that was even thought about 250 years ago as being that valuable.
Oh, yes, absolutely. Absolutely. And rightfully so, he's been concerned. And I mean, that is one thing I've always told clients is, look, if you are planning on manufacturing in China, you have to figure out, is there a way to protect your intellectual property, because there has been wholesale, I guess, what's the word I want?
Theft.
Yes. Theft is a good word. Yeah. There has been wholesale theft of people's intellectual property. And so I think the purpose behind Section 301 is certainly justified. I totally understand it. I just think that the way that it is being implemented it could be somewhat painful to a lot of American companies, as well as ultimately American consumers, because those costs will be passed on to consumers. So one thing I wanted to tell you about is try to kind of lay out for you where we are with these duties, like how they've evolved. And so we have 3 phases or tranches. In the very first tranche, tranche 1, the duties were placed on $34 billion worth of goods, and that was effective July 6th of 2018.
Is that a lot? Like, it sounds like a lot for me as an average poor person, but is that a lot of goods with China?
Well, it's a good group of goods because it's affecting electronics, automobiles, and aircraft.
Okay.
And it was a 25% increase, right?
Oh, wow. That is quite, are we seeing that now on our items in the U.S.? I live in London, just to clarify that. But are people seeing that, like, not able to afford, putting off maybe a year to buy the next car or anything?
Well,
not buying the new iPhone.
Well, what the good thing is with regards to automobiles is that there isn't a ton of automobile parts that are from China per se. I mean, a lot of them are from Mexico, Canada, Japan, and less so China. I mean, there certainly are parts, don't get me wrong, but because it would be, parts of autos, people probably aren't putting that off quite yet.
Okay.
Right? But then, and I'm going to come back to that because you asked a really good question that has to do with 232. So we'll come back to autos because there's something brewing there. Tranche 2 was on $16 billion. That was another 25%, and that was effective on August 23rd of 2018, and that affects chemicals, plastics, engines, and semiconductors.
Okay.
Right.
Wow.
So then the very last tranche is the one that's the scariest. Tranche 3 was on $200 billion worth of trade. That was effective September 24th of 2018, but it was supposed to be 10% until the end of 2018. And it affects so many different products, I can't really even give you a list, right? But it was supposed to go up to 25% on January 1st. But because there had been some progress with the Chinese and the trade deal that the USTR is working on, they postponed that increase to 25% to March 2nd of this year. And then when March, I guess, late February, they did. Yeah, late February came. They said we're going to postpone the 25% indefinitely until we figure out whether we're going to have a deal or we're not going to have a deal.
Okay.
So that's where we are. Yeah, that's where we are right now. We're at 10%, and if we get a deal, then there's a discussion that likely this last tranche, the 200 billion tranche, these tariffs would roll off.
Oh, like they just get rid of them completely, or the 10% increase at least.
So there's a discussion they would get rid of them, or if we don't have a deal, then they may go up to 25%. So that would not be good because that's a heck of a lot of different types of products, consumer products, that kind of thing. So I don't know. It's hard to say what's going to happen. I'm reading the paper. on a daily basis trying to figure out, how to navigate this and what's going to happen next.
So businesses need to hope for the best and prepare for the worst. So how do they do that?
Absolutely.
How are they,
Yeah,
with
yeah.
the current situation and the potential of it going up another 15%, how can they best navigate the Section 301 tariff process? What are even inclusion requests? And then how does that work in your experience? What is an inclusion request? And then how does it work?
Okay, yes. So it's actually an exclusion request.
Oh, sorry.
No worries, no worries. Okay, so yeah, there's a lot of things they can do. The problem is with the first two lists or tranches, the deadlines to file exclusion requests has come and gone. So there's no opportunity to go in for an exclusion request. There's been a lot of scuttlebutt about an exclusion process for list 3. There are a lot of people trying to pressure the USTR and the president into making sure there's an exclusion process for list 3. President Trump signed an appropriations bill not terribly long ago, like February, and there was an instruction in that appropriations to the USTR to create an exclusions process. But Ambassador Lighthizer is interpreting that in such a way that it isn't necessary unless or until that the 10% goes up to 25%. It doesn't really say that, so I don't know why he's interpreting it that way. We were really excited that he was going to be forced.
This means individual businesses or individual products are excluded
it would be individual,
from the increase?
Yeah. No, yes and no. So the thing is that the exclusion process is a process where a company goes in and specifically identifies products that meet certain criteria and for which they're requesting relief. And so that process for this largest list 3, 200 billion, doesn't exist right now. And so there's a lot of pressure currently on the Hill and the USTR to say, hey, even though it's only 10%, we think we should have an exclusion process. And so there have been a couple of bills introduced to force an exclusion process to be created. But right now, it's anyone's guess whether or not one will be for list 3.
So supposedly no one has been excluded from list 3.
Yes. No one has been excluded from list 3 unless they were able to obtain some kind of relief at the public hearing that happened a long time ago, last year, right? And I don't think if memory serves me correctly, there wasn't a lot of relief from that hearing. So you're right. No, right now, people can't go in for an exclusion, but we're watching it closely to see if one will be created. But for list 1 and list 2, the one thing I tell people, you asked about how they mitigate, and the way they mitigate is that they can follow other companies that are competitors if they have an exclusion request that has been granted. They could use that company's exclusion request as the basis for avoiding the tariff. Okay?
Oh, yeah, that makes sense. It's fair. Yeah.
Yes, it's very fair. So I have several clients. We have about, I want to say, 200, at least 200 exclusion requests pending with regards to certain types of consumer products and scientific instrumentation. And those are all in what's called stage 3 of the review by the USTR. And so essentially what that means is if somebody is in stage 3, it means that the USTR has no objections or is basically approving the exclusion request, but the only thing pending is whether or not U.S. Customs can administer the exclusion claim based on the tariff, harmonized tariff, the number in which the item is classified, whether or not that can be administered so that the company that receives the exclusion process can actually receive that benefit. So it's an administrative type issue So what I tell people is if you follow your competitors and they're in stage 3, follow
Should be
that
pretty easy to get there. Yeah.
Yeah, follow it extremely closely, because when it comes to stage 4, then you can use it too.
Oh, that's great. So stage 4 is once it's proven for one, it sets a precedent for all of that particular product.
Exactly.
Oh, that's great. And I guess you would, your law firm would be helping people follow that process, because I'm sure it's not something that you can just track your order on Amazon. It's
no. So there's specific. There's specific customs procedures that the customs broker, who's an agent that clears the goods on behalf of the importer, would have to perform in order for a company to take advantage of an exclusion. So there's different processes that they would have to follow. And the only thing I wanted to mention about 232, Section 232, that one is also additional duties, but it's basically every country you could think of except for a handful of that are quota-based tariffs. Even including Mexico and Canada on steel and aluminum. So the focus is steel and aluminum, and it's a 25% tariff increase on steel and a 10% on aluminum. If the item's from Turkey, then it's 50% on steel and 20% on aluminum. Yeah, yep. So the goal here is, this came from the Trade Act of 1962, and the goal here is to protect national security. And when we can't produce steel and aluminum products in a sufficient number, it places our country in a national security bind or concern. So that's really what the basis is here.
Why?
Is trying to shore up. Yeah, because we don't have the resources available for defense weaponry and that kind of thing.
Oh, if we don't produce it ourselves, if we have to import it, we're not autonomous enough in our defense production.
Yeah, defense as well as commercial. So it really affects a lot of commercial aircraft, airlines, that kind of thing. But anyway, so that one, anyone can go in for an exclusion request. There's no deadline, so people can do that now. So that one's a little bit different. But if your competitor gets an exclusion granted, you're not allowed to use theirs. And I think the difference is because there was a deadline on Section 301, and there's no deadline in Section 232. With Section 301, once you get an exclusion, the duties that you've paid are refunded. You get a retroactive refund back to the date that they were effective. So that's really awesome. And they're good. It's good from 1 year from the date it was granted. So looking back all the way back to when it was implemented, and then looking forward until 1 year from the date it was granted. 232 is not like that. It's only retroactive back to the day you filed it. So every day people wait on going in is more money they're going to lose, right? So 232 and 301, they definitely have different procedures and different mechanisms. And the only other thing on the 232 that I wanted to mention, a lot of the mitigation procedures will work for both 232 and 301. But they do have different procedures, and you just have to be cognizant of the different deadlines and timing and requirements involved. And the only other thing about 232 I wanted to point out is that there is a report sitting on the president's desk, and we don't know what it says about whether or not the president should increase tariffs on auto parts and automobiles by 25%. So that's going to be another Section 232 activity. I'm hoping that we'll hear something. Well, the president had 90 days from the date it was submitted. I think it was submitted, I want to say late February, if memory serves me. So we haven't heard anything about that, but that would make me want to go get a car.
Before that happens. Yeah,
that would make me want to go get a car.
So when he if the president signs something like this, there's a leeway of time that will boost that industry before the tariffs go in, I assume, right?
Right, absolutely.
Okay.
And I mean, one thing I would say to you is NAFTA, right? The NAFTA 2.0, what is being referred to as the USMCA. There's a huge concern because we are putting these steel and aluminum duties on Canada and Mexico, our neighbors, our trading partners that are very significant. And both Mexico and Canada have stated that they will not sign, or they will not pass, because they've already signed the agreement, but they will not implement the trade agreement into law unless the U.S. removes the steel and aluminum duties. So I think we've got a real problem here, because in reading what the USTR is talking about, it sounds like he wants to have some kind of quota placed on Mexico and Canada, and I don't think they're going to be too
Doesn't
excited.
fit in with the theme
Yeah.
of NAFTA at all.
No, I don't think so. And the only other thing I wanted to say is, like, there are a couple of other things you can do besides exclusion requests. You can look at sourcing your goods in a different country. A lot of people have to be really careful about how their goods are classified. This is one thing I always tell people is, before you decide whether or not your item is subject or is not subject to Section 232 or 301, you really need to undertake a classification review of your products to see whether or not the goods were classified correctly in the harmonized tariff. If they are not classified correctly, it cuts both ways. You can either be paying duties you shouldn't have to, or
you're missing
not
and you're going
paying
to get
them.
fined. Yeah.
And you're going to get fined, right? So that's really critical. And we've had clients that are considered, gold card partnership importers with customs that even they have had classification errors that needed to be corrected. So I always tell people, don't assume that everything is correct in your classifications. You need to have a third party look at it and see if there's any differences of opinion there, and then try to resolve it in some way that's safe to the company.
And how often should you bring a third party in to resolve that, or to check out your classification status and your tariff status?
I think that is something that a company should do on a periodic basis. And the reason I think that is because a lot of times a company doesn't know what it doesn't know, right? So it continues to make the same mistakes over and over unless it has an objective person looking at the tariff classifications. I mean, some companies, their goal is to classify their goods in every duty-free provision that they can ever think is possibly applicable, and that's not the way you're supposed to classify your goods.
That can get you in trouble. Yeah,
that can get you into trouble.
Let's be honest, everyone is, hopefully, if they have a successful business, are good at running their business. They're good at what they're good at. But that doesn't mean they're good at trade. That's your forte. That's not a lot of companies' forte, and that's a really important thing to think about. Especially, I outsource my taxes because I don't want to mess them up. So it does make sense to outsource to someone with as many years experience, even though you were 5 when you started.
Yes, exactly.
Of course. So thank you so much, Adrienne, for taking the time to explain to us and give us a bit of insight about the Section 301 and 232, and a bit about what's going on in the news and how that actually affects business better with the trade war with China and trade in general, it sounds like. So thank you so much, and thank you to all of our IR Digital listeners. The IR Digital podcasts are meant to be educational resources from experienced lawyers, accountants, and financial advisors with extensive knowledge on topics, just like Adrienne has clearly, that you as professionals need to know about. To learn more about IR Digital, thank you so much. That was great. So Adrienne, if our listeners want to follow up with you directly about how to mitigate their risk and optimize their gain in international trade, what's the best way to contact you?
I would say they can either call or email do you want me to give my email?
Sure, yeah.
It's Adrienne, ADRIENNE, at Braumiller, B as in boy, RAUMILLER, law, LAW.com. They can email me or they can call me at 214-348-9306.
And of course, +1 area code in case someone has company outside and they're working with the US. That's great. That is very personal help. So that's awesome to give your phone number too. So thank you to everyone again for listening. Thank you again, Adrienne. To learn more about IR Digital and its services, go ahead and visit irglobal.com. And if you found this episode useful, we're really excited to continue it. So please continue sharing it and liking on our SoundCloud page. Thank you so much. Also, I just thought I'd add at the end to give people context to where we are in the world. And the date today is March 20th. It seemed important as we're talking about these topical news that could change very quickly or maybe not at all. Thank you, everybody, and have a great day. Bye.